Hello there. This is Elena in my channel Enough. Today I'm saying enough of torture. And in every country, in any country, there shouldn't be any torture of people. And today I will tell you about a very interesting lady, Olga Sadovskaya. She is a chief of the Department of International Law, defense of people through a team against torture from Nizhny Novgorod. She's an international lawyer from Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. She's giving an interview to Katerina Gordeeva in Katerina Gordeeva's program. It's called Tell Gordeeva. Ms. Gordeeva is a very interesting journalist. She has a lot of interesting interviews with people, different people in Russia, from Russia anyways. This is the interview I find extremely interesting. Unfortunately, it's in Russian only, and that's why I will translate you a little bit. And another thing I wanted to tell you today is apparently I was tortured myself. No, I have never been in jail, and I have never been at war, on the war, like fighting war with anybody or anything like that. No, I was tortured as a child, apparently, because at the time I was very young, between 3 and 4.5 years old, and I didn't know it was a torture. But we will talk about it a little bit later. Today, let's see what Ms. Sadovskaya has to say. And also, I was disgusted to know that the team which is a team against torture, a committee against torture, which is Ms. Sadovskaya is working for, now in Russia considered foreign agent, and it's a bad thing in politics, in Russian politics, and with Putin's regime. How disgusting that the committee which fighting for human rights in Russia, the basic human rights, the main human right, not to be tortured, considered a bad foreign organization with all the restrictions applied. So let's see what Ms. Sadovskaya has to say.
Самый главный признак пытки – это то, что она совершается либо агентами государства, либо по их поручительству.
The main sign of a torture that it is committed either by state agents or because state agents told somebody to do so.
Либо по их допущению. Это единственное.
Or because the agents of the state allowed it to happen.
Единственное базовое право, которое нельзя ограничить никогда.
The only basic right which never can be limited.
Право на жизнь не так.
It's the right not to be tortured. Even the right to live
защищено как право на свободу от пыток. Случайно убить.
It's not as defended, the right to live, even not as defended as the right not to be tortured in many countries.
Ты можешь, а случайно пытать ты не можешь.
You can kill someone accidentally, but you cannot torture someone accidentally.
Ты же можешь не пытать.
But you cannot to torture anybody, saying Ms. Gordeeva.
Можешь не пытать, но если ты пытаешь, ты стоишь на стороне тех, у кого сила.
Yes, you can not to torture, but if you are torturing someone, you are standing on the side of those who has power.
Защищен.
And you protected by them if you torture someone.
Правда, что тебя выдвигали на Нобелевскую премию?
Is it true that you was a nominant of the Nobel Prize?
Да.
Yes.
Возможно, чтобы спасти одного человека, можно убить другого.
To save one person, you can kill another person. It's possible.
Чтобы освободить одного человека, можно пытать другого.
To free one person, it is possible to torture another person.
Вопрос в том, что происходит потом.
The most important part, what will happen after that.
Потом ты должен быть наказан.
After that, you have to be punished.
Если ты никогда не интересовался правами человека, если ты никогда не поддерживал никакую правозащитную организацию,
If you never was interested in human rights, if you have never helped any organization which protecting human rights,
у тебя нет никакой гарантии, что в твоем регионе будут правозащитники тогда, когда тебе понадобится помощь.
you have no guarantees that in the region where you live, when you will need help to defend your rights, your human rights, you will not have, most likely you will not have the organization which will defend your rights.
Жестоко.
That's cruel, saying Gordeeva. So this is let's talk about what is torture.
По их допущению. Всего можно только специально сделать. Музыкой, потому что он включил ее в 2 ночи. Ты пытаешь, ты принимаешь для себя решение. Я пытаю.
Если
When you torture someone, you make any decision. I am torturing someone.
четкое определение того, что такое пытки.
Is there is a description what is torture?
На самом деле.
Конечно. Есть Конвенция ООН 1984 года.
There is United Nations Convention of 1984.
Конвенция ООН против пыток и других видов жестокого бесчеловечного обращения и наказания.
About against torture and inhumane treating of people.
У пытки есть несколько признаков, чтобы сказать, что это пытка. Потому что пытка
Torture has several descriptions, several things supposed to be together to say it's torture.
это очень расхожее слово. Да? Сосед пытает меня музыкой, потому что он включил ее в 2 ночи.
It is, some people use that word lightly, like my neighbor is torturing me because he turned on the music at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Это пытка, потому что там еще что-то происходит. Нет, во-первых, самый главный признак пытки – это то, что она совершается либо агентами государства, либо по их поручительству, либо по их допущению.
The most important signs of torture is because it's committed by the state agents, or because state agents told somebody to do so, or because they allow it to happen.
Всегда, когда мы говорим про права человека, это взаимоотношения человека и государства как обеспечителя соблюдения прав человека.
Every time when we're talking about human rights, we're talking about the relationship between a person and a state. And state supposed to defend the rights of the person.
То есть физическое лицо частное не может нарушить права человека другого частного лица. Он может преступление совершить.
Private person cannot violate human rights of another person. They can commit a crime. When we're talking...
Это уже совершенно другая история. Права человека может нарушить только государство, либо государство должно нести за это ответственность, когда оно подстрекало к совершению чего-то, какое-то частное лицо, но это все равно ответственность.
The only state can violate human rights or make someone to violate somebody's human rights because state told them to do so. We see it in Ukraine. Like if there are no human rights basically now in Russia, we can see very easily that if people can torture people in Russia, they do it abroad as well. This is what's happening in Ukraine. What you saw in Izum, you saw in Bucha and stuff like that, you saw torture of people. It's because they told to do so by the state. It's a terror. It's a tactic of terror. Russian state, Putin and Russian state, that's what they making Russian army to do on purpose by the state, by decision of the state.
На государстве лежит. Возвращаемся к пыткам.
And responsibility for that, as saying Sadovskaya, and I agree with her, is laying on the state.
То есть это действие, которое вызывает либо физическое, либо психическое боль или страдание.
So torture is an action which cause either psychological or physical pain or suffering.
Которое либо совершено агентом государства, либо совершено при его попустительстве.
Which committed either by state agent or by the state agent allow it to happen.
Или по его поручению.
Or when the state agent told somebody to do so.
И имеет под собой определенную цель.
And it has certain aim. It's have a goal in mind. It's done for a reason.
Либо получить информацию, либо заставить что-то сделать.
Either get some information or force person to do something.
Либо получить признание в чем-то, либо
Or make person incriminate himself or admit that they committed the crime.
информацию о третьих лицах. То есть
Or maybe get some information about third people, third parties.
пытка, она всегда целенаправлена.
So the torture always has a goal in mind. It has an aim.
У нее есть определенная цель. Со временем, правда, стандарты меняются, и сейчас уже Европейский суд иногда признает пыткой обращение, которое уже достигло серьезного уровня жестокости, при этом цель не всегда получается сформулировать.
Sadovskaya is saying that the situation is changing right now, and the law changing a little bit, and even European courts deciding that sometimes there is a torture, and not always it's easy to verify what kind of aim, what kind of goal they was trying to accomplish. As to the situation in Ukraine, the goal is most of the time is terror. Partly they trying to get some information out of people, but the goal is terror and or revenge. Sometimes that, mostly terror, and it's a tactic. It's a military tactic. Another thing I wanted to show you, it was very interesting as well, is
10 назад я преподавала в Академии МВД на курсах повышения квалификации для действующих сотрудников полиции. У меня
about 10 years ago, I was teaching in a military police academy for people who kind of getting, they already police people and they trying to kind of get better qualification and stuff like that.
У меня был 9-месячный курс по правам человека. И мы сумели провести исследование, когда мы опрашивали студентов первого курса Академии МВД и студентов пятого курса. Если вот
They had a research when they was questioning first year students and the fifth year students of the academy, the police academy.
вам нужно получить из человека информацию, а у вас что-то не складывается, не получается.
If you want to get some information from a person, a suspect, and not everything working very well, something just you can't get some information.
Вот как вы считаете, можно к нему применять незаконные методы воздействия, пытки? Или
What do you think? Could you use torture to get the information you need? Yes or no?
нельзя? На первом курсе 18% ответило, что можно.
First year students, 18% of them said yes, you can.
А когда этот вопрос задаешь на пятом курсе, то отвечают «да» больше половины.
When you're asking the same question on the fifth year of the university, of the academy, more than 50% Russian policemen, which almost ready to go out in the world and be policemen, they finish in their academy, their university, they said, yes, you can use torture. I'm disgusted to know that about my country.
Это не в семье их воспитали. Они пришли туда 18-летними взрослыми людьми. Вот этот вот большой процент, он был воспитан вот этой вот системой высшего образования для людей, которые готовят кадры. И то, как люди, которые работают в следствии, в судах, в полиции, говорят про...
She is saying that this is not the family educated them that well in that situation, that it's not family taught them about that it's okay to torture people. It's a state system of education. They came to university, 18 years old, grown-up people. And by the end of the university, over 50% of them thinking that it's okay to torture people. it is not okay. It's not okay in anywhere in the world. Even she's criticizing a bit United States, but today we're talking about Russia, and I'm not gonna go into this too much, but I personally traveled through 42 states of the United States. And the law system in states working well. And yes, in every country, somewhat, in many countries, there are torture and stuff like that. In the United States is not an exclusion. But I am quite disagree with her on the point that, first of all, if in the States there is stuff like that happening, it became known. There is statistics, there are people who fighting against it, there are people who defending human rights, and it became public knowledge, and the country trying to fight it. In Russia or in USSR, all of that was hidden, that information about torture. Not in the statistics, it's hidden, it considered normal. Many people, she was saying in the past also in that show, that when they asking people, do you believe there is torture in Russian system and so on, many people say, no. Did you ever experience that? No. Do you think they beating people up in the police? I mean, many people said, yeah, oh, absolutely. This is torture. This is what torture looks like. If somebody get beat up in the police, this is torture. But many people in Russia think, yeah, that's okay. It's not a torture. Yes, it is. And the countries, the well-developed democratic countries, they fighting it. They openly saying this is what's happening. And that is why sometimes people from Russia thinking some things is bad in some countries. But in fact, in Russia, it's way worse. So on that point, I kind of disagree with her. There is another very interesting, the last very interesting piece I want to show you is this one.
То есть, если мы возвращаемся к понятийному какому-то аппарату, то этим занимаются представители государства, агенты государства, да, и мы можем говорить, что это и военнослужащие, если мы говорим о мирном времени, это вообще может быть кто угодно, это может быть воспитатель детского садика. У меня вот есть дело, где применяли пытки к 3-летнему ребенку в детском садике в Санкт-Петербурге.
She's saying that torture, it's not necessarily something happening with people in jail, or somebody, like police arrested somebody and beat him up, or in the army. There are torture, there are cases of torture in private life, in the regular civilian life. She's talking about the case when 3-year-old child in St. Petersburg, the big city, was tortured in kindergarten, they call it in Russia, but it's daycare. It's like a government daycare.
То есть не надо думать о том, что это что-то где-то далеко от нас. Это в твоем дворе, в твоей школе, в твоем детском саду.
We must not think that the torture is something far away from us. It's in your backyard, it's in your school, it's in your daycare, government daycare.
А что от него хотели?
What
Он
did they
просто
want?
плохо себя вел.
What did they want from the child? Oh, he just misbehaved, was very...
Это ужасное дело. Мальчик до сих пор не восстановился.
The boy still not the same. He couldn't still not good after that. Like the guy was just the kid was hyperactive, misbehaved.
Ребенку было 3,5 года. Он был просто гиперактивный ребенок. И его, ну, то есть его пытали. Ему заклеили.
He was 3.5 years old, and he was tortured. They glued his mouth with the tape.
Клеивали рот скотчем, его заставляли весь тихий час стоять в трусах с поднятыми руками.
They have in Russian daycare they have a sleeping hour. The whole sleeping hour he was standing in his underwear with his hands up in the air.
Его привязывали скотчем к раскладушке, пока дети уходили гулять, и ставили в кладовку с крысами.
He was glued to the folding bed by the tape, and it was put in a little room where there were rats.
Это делали взрослые люди.
Это делали взрослые люди.
Is that adults did it to a child? Yes, that was adults. The daycare authorities, like it's not a teacher in Russia, it's just the educator.
Воспитатели в культурной столице Российской Федерации.
In the cultural capital of Russian Federation, this is what was happening in St. Petersburg. So this is, I can relate to that situation, and because I was also about 3, maybe up to 4.5 years old, something like that in between. And in Russia, there is no there are no babysitters and stuff like that where you could pay children. I grew up in USSR; it wasn't even modern day Russia yet, and Russian people, they just didn't have an option. They either have a government facility, which called in Russia kindergarten, but it wasn't kindergarten like in States or in Canada, where it's part of the school. No, it's a separate, completely organization, separate building with the where people could leave their children there, or people can, if they have grandparents who doesn't work, which many of them do still, and they can look after your child, that's great. If you don't, the option is a government daycare. And to get to that government daycare, it was quite possible and easy to do. And in my time, it wasn't cost anything to the parents. And before you put your child in there, the child has to go through all the doctors, medical doctors, the whole commission of them, and they will check their everything. Health, vision, like I went through optometrist. And I get to the daycare. I was very little. I never would stay with anyone beside my parents and my grandparents, which was working at the time. And so the very basically first days when I just get to that place, parents just, it's not like when I brought my child to kindergarten in Canada, I could stay with him days there. And I did, because my child didn't know English at the time. And he was little and he get used to it and he liked it. Then I could leave him there and stuff like that. In Russia, you have to go to work. So you brought your child to kindergarten, to that daycare, you drop him off and you left for the whole day. And child stay with people he'd never seen before. Of course, I was scared, I was crying, I wanted to go home. That's all I did. So the educator locked me up in the locker. It was wooden locker, kind of like you see in schools in different countries, only it was a bit wide, about this wide, and about 1 meter tall. But it was dark. I was locked up there for some time because they couldn't make me stop wanting to go home to my parents. And about months after that, so my parents took me out of the kindergarten. They were Soviet people. They didn't know that you can sue the government. There wasn't even a question at the time that it's possible to do, that somebody could get punished for that. Months later, my parents noticed that my vision isn't good. So they took me to optometrist. And if before kindergarten, months ago, both my eyes was 100%, one of my eyes, after that experience, was 50%. So the vision in one eye dropped in half. And after that, I had to wearing glasses for years, and I had to go through a whole bunch of treatments. I have to go for a whole year to live with one of my grandmothers in a big city to be able to go through special treatments. And the vision was rebuilt up to about 80%, but it never was the same. Right now, I'm wearing just reading glasses, but I don't have to wearing glasses anymore because it did recover somewhat, but it never was the same. So apparently, as I find out, I was tortured. I didn't know it at the time. I was a child. So it is something which happening to people. It did happen to me, and I can imagine Russian trolls now gonna attack me and saying that just because I was tortured when I was a child, now I'm against Putin and I'm such a bad guy and crazy and everything. But let's see what happens. So let's talk about the system in Russia. This gentleman, Mr. Navalny, is one of the survived poisoning, oppositional leader of Russia. I have a separate video about him, and he was tortured as well. Only for him it was happening in jail. And first of all, I have a separate video, but it's started to be worse, the torture of Mr. Navalny. since I made the last video about that. I am not in any way connected to Mr. Navalny's team or to Ukraine or to any other country. I'm just one person. I am economist in the past, and I was teaching in several Russian universities. And right now, I am a Canadian citizen as well as Russian, and I'm a traveler, and I'm a writer. And I write mysteries, and I defend justice in my books and in real life. This is why I'm making this video. This is why I'm saying enough torture. And what was happening to Mr. Navalny? First of all, he was when he was he's still in prison for crime he did not commit, and now they're trying to pin on him other different crimes, like basically going against the government, against the war, and so on. And he created trade union for the prisoners and started to fight for his rights. After his poisoning and after several several things happened to him because of Russian government, his back was very in a bad condition, and he was used to work at the sewing machine, sitting on a very uncomfortable stool, not even an armchair or anything. And eventually he got some better chair and stuff like that, but this was just a part of a torture. Now things happening even worse. That's what Mr. Navalny said just very recently, either today or one of these days. He said that on his meeting with his lawyer today, they're not even complaining about new invention of prison authorities, but just kind of laughed about 5 minutes non-stop. Nobody ever seen anything like that before. As you know, like in civilized countries, there is a lawyer-client privilege when you can talk to your lawyer, seeing him in separate room, and decide about your defense and so on. And whatever information you give to your lawyer is privileged. Not anymore, not for Mr. Navalny. Not enough that for crime he didn't commit, he locked up in the jail with murderers, and even some little special jail created for him inside the jail. But at least he could see his lawyer, he could appeal certain things. But now, I'm quoting, he said, if before the lawyer was forbidden give me any documents, and they put me in a room with a plastic wall from metal, there are metal bars and plastic. But now that plastic wall they made not see-through. They put special film on it, and now he can't really see his lawyers, and they can't show even him any documents through that window, through that kind of plastic. He said, now my meeting with my lawyer is very much look like confession in a Catholic church. I sitting on a stool in a little room, meter by meter, and in front of me there is a plastic wall, and behind that wall I can hardly see the there is a person behind it. Kind of see his outlines of his body, and I only can guess that it's my lawyer by his voice. And now I'm always want to say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Kind of like Catholics saying. So this is torture. This is violation, a gross violation of human rights, not only because the innocent person sitting in jail, but even if it would be a guilty person, none of it is justified in any way. And I definitely against it. I demand freedom to Navalny and all political prisoners in Russia. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be done to people. This is a main human rights, not to be tortured. And now Ukrainians feel it on themselves like torture from Russian soldiers in Ukraine. And we can see the results of it when we can see the videos from Irpin, from Bucha, from Izum, and so on. It has to stop. People should have rights. People must have rights. It is just disgusting that in one of my countries in Russia, they don't have it. Enough of that. And with Mr. Navalny, there is another thing happening. He kind of very limited with human contact. Even prisoners not allowed to talk to him right now. There are 3 bells. They can hear when Navalny walking Navalny through the corridors, and they have to turn around back to him and not talking to him. This is another torture. How awful is that? I wouldn't wish anybody to be on his place. I guess he's still better than another Russian oppositional leader, Boris Nemtsov, who is dead, killed by, assassinated. So I guess it could be worse, but it is awful what's happening. I'm against it, and I hope Mr. Navalny and all political prisoners will be free and torture will stop. Thank you for watching my video. Thank you for your support and understanding and helping me out to make truth known to other people by sharing my videos and subscribing. Thank you very much. Have a good evening or have a good day. Please educate yourself and help Ukraine.